As much as people like me love to talk about Mario lore and theorize how fitting hundreds of games with zero consistency into one timeline could all still work, the cold hard fact of the matter is that generally speaking, Nintendo couldn't care less about timelines and continuity, especially when it comes to the Mario games. You may have heard the famous quote from Miyamoto about how the Mario cast should be viewed more as a troupe of actors that portray whatever role necessary rather than an actual world with a sensible continuity. And looking at their history, yeah, that pretty much describes how Nintendo treats Mario and the Mario world at large. And it's that simple fact that makes what happens in Donkey Kong Bananza so incredibly interesting. For the first time ever in such a high-profile game, we actually get a decent amount of explanations about what happened in the past, as well as glimpses of what will happen in the future. That is incredibly rare, it's basically unheard of in the larger Mario franchise, some occasional moments like Captain Toad's ending and the premise of the Yoshi's Island series notwithstanding. But what makes the way DK Bananza does it all the more strange is how even within its own newly created timeline, nothing makes sense. Within the confines of DK Bananza, a new Donkey Kong to Mario timeline is created and then also subsequently destroyed, with several moments that immediately break it again. But before we get to that, I do think it's important to establish once and for all that Donkey Kong Bananza does in fact do more than just reference past games. It actually sets out to create a bit of a timeline and continuity. I have to admit, before the game came out and people were talking about what a teenage Pauline meant for the Mario timeline, I couldn't help but feel a little disinterested, I guess. It felt to me like people were making a mountain out of a molehill. But as the release date came closer and several interviews with the developers made clear that the game would honor the history of the Donkey Kong series, as well as specify that there was a reason for why Pauline was 14 that players would have to find out for themselves, I slowly started to think that maybe Nintendo was actually doing something with timelines this time around. And now, I have finished the game and I must conclude that my initial skepticism was misplaced. This game 100% tries to establish a timeline for the Donkey Kong series and how it hooks into the Mario timeline as well. This isn't the same situation as how Odyssey makes some references to past Mario titles. There is actual care taken here to establish a certain order of things, a continuity. Those developer quotes already made that clear. Pauline was made 14 specifically, so the events of this game would lead into Odyssey. But we also have the dialogue with Diddy and Dixie Kong that specifically mentions the events of Donkey Kong Country 2, Diddy's Conquest, Cranky Kong references the Donkey Kong arcade title, the quiz tone of the resort layer references DK64, and while the fossils referencing past Donkey Kong animals can easily be played off as references, there seems to be a relationship with how deep the layer they're found on is and how new the character is. For example, Professor Chops from Donkey Kong Country Returns appears as a fossil in the highest layer that has cameo fossils, the forest layer, while the deepest layer, the planet core, has the 8-bit fossils that reference arcade Donkey Kong. All of this were conscious decisions by the devs to create a timeline. None of this was necessary whatsoever. Diddy and Dixie could not have said anything about DKC2 and no one would have batted an eye. But that isn't the case. Effort was made to summarize 45 years of Donkey Kong history into one working timeline, one that is eventually revealed by the end of the post-game to tie into Super Mario Odyssey. Make no mistake though, even though Donkey Kong Bananza very much builds a sort of timeline, it's not a super unique or mind-blowing one. It appears to just be the past Donkey Kong games in chronological order. You've got Arcade DK at the start, referenced with how Cranky Kong recalls the events of the game and how the 8-bit fossils are found at the deepest planet core. Then you presumably have the original Donkey Kong Country games, referenced through Diddy and Dixie, as well as simply the fact that those games themselves have an established continuity, and Returns and Tropical Freeze are tied in using the aforementioned Professor Chops fossil. There is also the possibility of DK Jungle Climber being tied in as well, which would make some of the spin-off-esque titles presumably canon as well, but that is hard to say. King K. Rool references the fact that he's back and alludes to his lengthy absence at several points, and while we don't know exactly how long he has been missing in universe, his last appearance in the series was in DK Jungle Climber. And then you obviously have Super Mario Odyssey, which the secret ending clearly ties into, implying it takes place, let's say 10 to 20 years after the events of Bananza, depending on how old Pauline is when Mario stops by again. all nice and good, but it makes absolutely no sense. And I don't even mean when taking in information from outside of these already mentioned games. Like, we see in Yoshi's Island DS that Donkey Kong and Mario are babies at the same time. So how does that work if Donkey Kong is already an adult by the time he meets a teenage Pauline and she then later meets a similarly aged Mario? And not to mention how all of a sudden the Mario vs Donkey Kong series is a lot more creepy, with Donkey Kong falling head over heels for Pauline, someone he apparently already befriended when she was a teen. All of that, I'm not touching that. This all falls under what I mentioned before. Nintendo not caring about timelines and just doing what feels right. Until Bananza, which goes out of its way to create a timeline for Donkey Kong that even when only using the information available to you in and around Bananza, still does not make the slightest bit of sense. First of all, there is the completely nonsensical role of Mario here. As has been established, Donkey Kong Arcade did happen in this new timeline, presumably with Cranky Kong in the role of Donkey Kong, which was actually already established all the way back in 1994 in the manual of Donkey Kong Country. It also appears that starting with this game, Lady, the damsel in distress from DK Arcade, is now a separate character from Pauline. There is an outfit referencing her by name. Age-wise, it obviously makes zero sense for Pauline to be both the teen on DK's back as well as the woman Cranky Kong captured, and considering Pauline mentions a grandmother in her bedtime conversations, it appears likely that is supposed to be Lady, seeing as her age presumably matches Cranky's, who is Donkey Kong's grandfather. Which then leaves Mario, or Jumpman, the player character from DK Arcade. Had Nintendo just kept their mouth shut, then I would probably now theorize that this was then presumably Mario's grandfather. But no. During the same press run where they teased Pauline being 14 as something plot relevant, they also made it very clear that Jumpman is still Mario, which just breaks this entire thing right from the get-go. How is Mario both Jumpman and the same old Mario when he visits Pauline in New Donk City? Unless Mario is some sort of mutant who takes years to age a few minutes, that just doesn't make any sense. We also know the existence of Jumpman wasn't retconned, since Cranky Kong mentions a rival wearing overalls, which is obviously a reference to him. So, if Jumpman is still Mario, as the developers confirmed literally weeks ago, this timeline already doesn't work from the jump. Not to mention that besides Pauline, Mario has also interacted with most of the Kongs, as well as Critters and King K. Rool in spin-offs. Side note though, while we're still talking about Odyssey, in this game Pauline says she was once kidnapped by an ape, in what was a life-changing experience for her. Now, of course, at the time, this was a nod to the original Donkey Kong, since Pauline was still Lady at the time, but now it reads as if she's talking about Void Kong kidnapping her, since she doesn't mention DK by name whatsoever. Plus, it was definitely an important moment in her life as we know it to be now. Not exactly breaking off the timeline stuff this, it's more the opposite, but I thought it was cool how this interaction still works and essentially has a new meaning now, so I figured I'd mention it. Anyway, back to how this timeline doesn't work, with the next character to break it, King K. Rool. Diddy and Dixie confirm the events of the Donkey Kong Country games have happened, with DK Bananza Donkey Kong in the role of DK Country Donkey Kong, confirming that despite different looks, they are the same person, or ape. But if that is the case, then Donkey Kong has factually fought and come into contact with King K. Rool before on several occasions, and yet it doesn't seem like the former rivals really recognize one another. Pauline's confusion at the introduction of the king is seemingly shared by DK, and K. Rool also doesn't appear to bat an eye the ape he once went out of his way to kidnap is now suddenly standing before him. How is that possible? If Donkey Kong Country has already happened at this point, if Donkey Kong had even already been kidnapped by K. Rool at this point, like we see in DKC2, why do we not see this incredibly expressive ape react at all to the reveal? I mean, we see more response in K. Rool's Smash Reveal trailer, and that was before DK's design was changed literally to make him more expressive. Now, I guess it cannot be ruled out that DK and King K. Rool do actually recognize each other here, but I feel like if that was the intention, then the game really does a great job of hiding that. All we have to go on is Cranky apparently giving chase to K. Rool, where we're left to believe he means Void Kong, and then saying he's doing Donkey's job, but that still isn't hard confirmation. We run into K. Rool like 4 times, and at not a single moment is their shared history clearly acknowledged. Not in the Forbidden Lair, not at the Bananium route, and not in New Donk City. And speaking of which, if New Donk City is not connected to Kong Island, as evidenced by King K. Rool declaring he has no idea of the city's existence, speaking of humans as if they are cryptids, why are there advertisements for Lanky Kong visible? Is he missing in action because he moved to New Donk City or something? Maybe to do IT work? The names of Angard, Candy and Tiny Kong also appear, but since the first could be a species and the latter two have names that are also words, this doesn't necessarily have to tie into the characters in universe. Lanky is shown with his face, however. And by the time Odyssey rolls around, the street names in New Donk City actually all reference DK characters as well, including the retroactively weird K. Rool Avenue, which is now apparently named after the character that nearly destroyed the entire city. But all in all, I think Donkey Kong Bananza actually does an admirable job of establishing a Donkey Kong timeline. The devil's in the details, and that's where some mistakes were made, both in the game and outside of it, but I love the effort that is put in and would love to see something similar happen when Mario's next 3D adventure rolls around. And while I do think it is disappointing from a making sense perspective, I do understand why Nintendo is hesitant to separate Jumpman and Mario. After all, Mario is their flagship character and has been long established that he is as old as the original Donkey Kong game. Now suddenly saying that he's actually younger would be a rather blunt move, and one that doesn't really serve a purpose either. From their perspective, it's better to leave it like this. As a continuity error in a 40-year-old story that only guys like me will point out, but doesn't affect the enjoyment of the game whatsoever. And I mean, we got K. Rool back, that alone was worth it. Not to mention, this is really the first time the core Mario and Donkey Kong series have been linked since, well, ever, really. Yoshi has always been connected to the Mario series, Wario is kinda in and out, but Donkey Kong Country was always very much its own thing. Until now. And so, while the timeline established in DK Bananza doesn't actually work when you take a closer look at it, that doesn't mean it isn't something very cool and something we can be happy about existing. But what are your theories on the timeline shenanigans established in DK Bananza? Did you spot other flaws? Or do you disagree with me? Share it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribe to the channel to stay updated on all my future Mario and Donkey Kong content coming up. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.